So this will be the third instalment of me as Webb, reading The Third Metropolis, Imagining Brisbane Through Art and Literature by William Hatherell. This is a project for my granny, my hero, Gretchen Osborne. I hope you feel better soon. Also, hello to my dear friend Marissa and her mum Juno. Thanks for listening, my fellow Brisbangers. Picking up where we left off on page 50, exploring the poetry of Brian Verpont during World War II. One of his long poems, The Miracle, is characterised by a dialectic of crisis and renewal. The poem won the C.J. Dennis Prize in 1939, so presumably was written before the outbreak of war. H.M. Green takes the theme of the poem to be soil erosion, but the opening lines certainly invoke the fraught atmosphere of the late 1930s, at least as a metaphor for the conflict that the poem describes. Great fear was on the cities, the obscene dread of war. But earth, that nothing pities and nothing answers for, fired the first and deadly shot against her enemy. As critic A.A. Phillip points out, Verpont subscribes to a kind of pantheism that eschews the conventional pastoral vision. Verpont feels nature as primarily an ethic force and as the earthy source of all healthy rootedness, rather than as the beautiful comforter. A central distinction is between the pragmatic violence of nature and the gratuitous destructiveness known only by man. Claws, venom, jaws, take, no blame, no guilt was yours. Snarl or hiss, stroke silent. Roar, bite big, nip small or sting, all things save for one explore, their lusts for harvesting. The one who did so trespass and trouble the good earth, so stripped from the tree the Christmas of her giving to each birth. That not a single live thing, stationary, swift, slow, tiger, snail, foot or wing, did not seek some hollow. Safe from his tyrant's probe, that one was man always and forever man in robe, of judge, he whose vain praise trumpets from the bald battlements, of intellect sonships of God with pale sacraments, bridges the ocean strip of ignorance, womb and grave. Verpont here uses a highly charged religious vocabulary to portray the orthodox Christian notion of the kinship of God and man as a kind of hubris that threatens the natural order. But the events leading up to the war seem to lie behind this vision of a human violence that dwarfs even the violence of nature. The central part of the poem is a dialogue between figures representing life and death that is apparently modelled on Shelley's verse plays, particularly Prometheus Unbound. The model of poetry Verpont adopts from Shelley gives a quasi-religious, ritualistic structure and language to express views that are close to Shelley's own religious heterodoxy and political radicalism. The ending of the poem is optimistic, with a personified man begging forgiveness. Earth, earth, forgive, body of God, forgive. For Verpont, the war as the culmination of the crisis of the 1930s was an enlivening, creative force. His most important collection, Beyond the Claw, appeared during the war years, and the sense of crisis underlying his best work allows him to use literary influences to creative effect in a way quite unlike others of the era in Brisbane. Judith Wright displays a comparable capacity to renew literary traditions and mythical symbols. In a poem written before her arrival in Brisbane and published in Meanjin in 1943, Wright uses an image of blood to link personal experience, her grief for a friend, a young airman shot down in Europe, to a mythic, although agnostic, vision of redemption. Since blood has been your gift, let me accept it, remembering that for spring's resurrection, some sacrifice was always necessary. Osiris, Christ, your flesh, broken like bread, will be the rite that marks the heart's rebirth. Wright's most sustained vision of post-war redemption, spring after war, manages to reinvigorate the pastoral convention by taking it so literally in the image of the ewe and the lamb. Which is the country, which is true? How reconcile the treacherous earth, the gaping flesh, how reconcile? and still move forward to some birth as the lamb moves within the ewe. The questions may seem as domesticated and thoroughly pastoral version of a drama similar to that which Verpont represents so apocalyptically in The Miracle. Another version of the pastoral appears in Joseph O'Dwyer's verse play Blossom on the Dawn, one of 4 members of an RAAF squadron that waits for the alert somewhere in England, 1942, recalls his hometown of Brisbane. I wonder how the sunlight looks from Cootha now. I wonder how the river spreads her sinuating charms this springtime, how the jacarandas flock about its banks, and the weeping fig trees burst the deep blue air with gold. Now that the year's declining splendour here turns everything to gold, autumnal in decay, I think of the lovely hills and the river curled about their bases, filled of a Saturday afternoon with sails, where my skiff would lean her curving beauty in the south wind, headed for Lytton, the open bay. As in the works by David Malouf, Gwen Hardwood and others, Brisbane is located here through this distinct quality of its light. The images are mediated, however, through several levels of exile. O'Dwyer, living in Melbourne, where he had moved from Brisbane in 1941 and barred from active duty in the war, remains separated from the emotional turbulence of participating in an overseas war and from the countryside of his boyhood. Moreover, he is thinking specifically of his brother, the dedicee of the poem, who was shot down in Europe in July 1942. This connection suggests a further link between the narrator's ambivalence to the English landscape and the Australian anxiety about the continued presence of its forces in Europe after the homeland itself came under threat after Pearl Harbor. Although no doubt qualified by the dramatic structure of the poem, based on the differing perceptions of 4 voices, the narrator puts a view radically at odds with the anti-suburban rhetoric of some of O'Dwyer's other poetry. If I ever live beyond this pain of war, I'll live in some suburban bungalow, a life as orderly as a draught board, in my own dear land, by my own dear river. Perhaps the most conventional response of all the Brisbane writers to the end of the war was Ernest Briggs' VP Day, 1945, a Shakespearean sonnet neatly divided into an octave that gestures to the noble dead and a sestet looking to the future. Let us rejoice, let us go mad and sing, ring bells, clash gongs, blow whistles, shout, and then let us be silent for a little space, remembering those whom we loved who shall not come again, and walk the common ways of life clear-eyed, who wore their youth like young Shakespearean kings, and went with laughter on their lips and died, out of anguish made immortal things. They died for peace, but we must live for peace, or fear to face their eyes' unspoken blame, lest all that nobleness they brought decrease, and lest by their unworthiness should come to shame, must spend our lives for peace, that they, the spent, become in us their living monument. Jumping ahead to a poem by a favoured original Meanjin poet, James Picot, it opens with a reference to Shorncliffe's Timid Cliffs that I thought Granny might like. James Picot died young as a prisoner of war on the Burma-Siam Railway. On Shorncliffe's timid cliffs, we mazed our bread with dreams. He on a tree limb, the sea wind's laughter. I for audience, the gulls, and an amazed wayfarer, and the invisibles of space. The poems discussed in this section generally use forms, conventions, and allusions from the European literary tradition, and in particular British Great War poetry, with varying degrees of success. While such a body of work is certainly evidence of the impact of war on Brisbane creative artists, the derivative quality of some of these works may reflect an ambivalence about Brisbane's status as war metropolis. The war was vividly present through the dramatic militarization of the city,
yet being fought in locations and in a manner largely incomprehensible to the non-combatant poets steeped in English poetry. Some of the literary representations of the wartime city itself, as will be shown in the following section, manage to convey experience more directly, even while retaining something of this ambivalence about Brisbane's status as war metropolis. Okay, thanks for listening, anybody and everybody. Especially Granny, I hope these videos make you feel a bit better, and I hope you get better real soon. Particularly Ress and Marty and Ress's mum Juno for their positive feedback. We're thinking of maybe starting a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter or a Patreon platform for more episodes of me reading this book and for our other creative projects. Any financial contributions help us get the 7,000 needed for our Australian partner visa to live in Australia once more, real soon, we hope. Thank you.